Hello, 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 everybody. It is Thursday, which means it's PitchZone Day. And I see we already have a viewer on YouTube. Hello, Dan. Dan Schwartz is joining us. Dan, glad to have you here at PitchZone. Dan, let us quickly know in the chat, where do you join us from? And while you do that, I will very briefly introduce the program here. PitchZone is a weekly live show where a few coaches get together. We are 4 of us get together, and we either have a fireside chat or we have a presenter that comes in and we help them improve a short pitch. That can be an investor pitch, that can be a customer pitch, any type of short pitch. We also have Rick Pollack on the line here on YouTube. Hello, Rick. Really a great pleasure to see you. And as every week, of course, we have the coaches that are here. So let me bring in the first one, Nathan Gold. Nathan, how are you today?
Doing great. Thank you for having me once again. And I'm really looking forward to this session, especially because it's not every day you get to meet a champion of anything.
That is certainly the case. Now, we haven't even mentioned, what is this session all about? Because I'm so excited about this session for exactly that reason. We have not only a champion speaker and somebody that really knows these high-pressure presentations. We have the coach that's actually in your title, Nathan. It says you are the high-stakes presentation coach. And the focus here is really on high stakes. And this is what we are doing today. We are going to talk about and just have a chat about high stakes presentations. What does it take to prepare for them? What does it take to calm your nerves right in the moments before them? And so it is my real delight to have you here, Nathan, and of course also Scottie Spurzem. Scottie is a frequent coach here at PitchZone, and we had a little discussion just before now. And Scottie told me something that I didn't even know. But Scottie, well, do you want to tell the people what you told me before?
Sure. I actually get really nervous before I have to do a big high-stakes presentation.
And so, that is amazing, right? Yes.
Yeah. So I've had good experience with this personally, and I've also helped many clients prepare for high-stakes presentations. But
of course. And this is the thing, right? You are really good at helping people prepare for these moments. Excellent. I know that because I've talked with some of your clients as well, right? And so, yes, you're really good. But on the other side, you actually have a level of anxiety. And this is what will make this discussion today so interesting. Because who knows, maybe at the end of today, well, there might be some change happening. Who knows? So let's bring in that World Championship speaker, our third coach, Stuart Pink. Stuart, as always, a real delight seeing you. You have been on many of the pitch zones, and I thought, well, today we have you in one of these top tips sessions. So I felt, well, why not make it about high stakes presentations? Because you know a thing or two, or maybe even 3 about how to prepare for this. Stuart, why are you so experienced with high stakes presentations? And why am I so excited about it?
Well, thank you, Claudio. So as you say, I came about 10, 11 years ago, I came 3rd in the Toastmasters World Championship of Public Speaking. And that's a competition which starts off with about 30,000 people all around the world competing. But I'm so excited to be here today because I have been involved in many of the PitchZone episodes. And one thing that has struck me as remarkable is how often all of the coaches agree on things. Whether we're coaching someone or we're discussing something, we seem to agree almost all the time about everything. But I think that this is an incredibly personal topic, preparing for a high
Yes.
stakes presentation. I think everyone is likely to do it a bit differently. Everyone is likely to have a way that works for them. So I am absolutely fascinated today to see what we come up with. I don't know if we're going to agree with each other or not, but one thing I always tell people I coach is this might be how I would do something, but you need to find what works for you. And if I can help you find what works for you, that's great. So that's the first piece of advice I would give listeners today is take what you can, see if it works for you, see if it needs a bit of adjustment, and then run from there. But Claudio, can I start with my first top tip for a high stakes presentation?
Of course.
This, I think, is really, really important. And I fully acknowledge that this is very easy to say, but perhaps not so easy to do. But my top piece of advice, if you have a high stakes presentation, is to not think of it as a high stakes presentation. I think the absolute worst thing that you can do is add that pressure to yourself. Now, when you are presenting, of course, you want to be present, you want to be in the moment, you want to be on your A game, but you're going to have that nervous energy and that adrenaline anyway. You don't need to be adding on top of that. And so the last thing you need to do is create a situation of these next 5 minutes are the most important 5 minutes of my life. These next 5 minutes will determine whether my life is a success or a failure. That is pressure that nobody needs. And so you need to move that thinking, I think, out of your head. And just to give you an example of this, those of you who've seen Shark Tank in America or Dragon's Den in the UK, we see this all the time. Some inventor comes on, they've invested their life savings into a product, they've put all their time and energy into it, and you can see them thinking, the success of everything depends on my 2-minute pitch in the next 2 minutes. And they freeze because the pressure gets to them. And then one of the sharks or the dragons brings them back down to earth and said, it's okay, just tell us about your product or your invention or your idea. And they're okay again. And so, as I say, that's my first tip. Please don't make it high stakes.
Wow, this is really, really profound, because I think we can now just finish this live stream, pack up and go home, because you just gave the secret away, Stuart. To not look at these situations as such a high stake, nerve inducing situation. Because it reminds me a little bit of that old Zen koan that basically says, you know, if a tree in the forest, if it falls and no one is around to hear it, does it still make a sound? So it really goes to who assigns meaning to what's happening. And there are some people that make almost every presentation in their mind a high stakes presentation. And this is when I want to move it over to Scottie, because Scottie, we were talking about this before, and it seemed to me that you are making almost every presentation that counts, that, you know, and of course they all do, because we always want to do our best, but you seem to assign a very special meaning to these events. Talk a little bit more about that, Scottie.
Well, sure. So because I can get in that frozen space, and Stuart, it's really great that we do often agree, and I agree with this for sure. And that was the fourth thing that I wrote down was confidence, moderate your self-pressure. And I always try to remember my advice and the good advice I've heard from all of you when I am preparing for, a high stakes presentation. And I'll give you an example of the thing that actually turned my thinking about it. I was working many years ago in the investor relations field with a celebrity CEO. I was really nervous about my first meeting with him and a group of investors. And I was pregnant with our second child. The oldest son got up on the wrong side of the bed, which was rare for him, but he was really not a happy camper. I was running late. My husband was out of town. It was all these things. And I finally just like took a few deep breaths and said to myself, if I can handle this cranky child, I can handle any CEO. And I walked in with a whole different level of confidence than I had anticipated, because real life happened. So I think you have to allow for real life to happen, and then steady yourself. And then the other thing I learned, and it's actually from Nathan, and I'm gonna give you guys plugs for things. Nathan wrote this really cool little book, which I was lucky enough to be able to do a little proofreading of, and there's a little bit of me in it. But I learned about breathing techniques, and you have to experiment with many of them to find the ones that work for you to settle yourself. But I had a weird triggering event on a ferry boat when there were terrorist attacks going on. And I really kind of flipped out before I had a client meeting. And I remember texting Nathan, like, oh my God, I'm freaking out. I'm, in hysterics before a big meeting with a new client. And he just told me to try these breathing techniques. And so for me, what really works, and I can do this in stealth mode, is to breathe in for a count of 3 or 4 through my nose, breathe out through my mouth for a count of 3 or 4. And I do it for 3 or 4 times. And while I'm doing that, I'm also just calming my brain. And where it has also kicked in is when I've been called up on stage, when I've been at big group events with a team of coaches, you're asked to come up on stage, which makes me nervous. And the nerves start going and the butterflies start flying. And by doing this stealth breathing and thinking about the first thing I'm going to say and the 3 points I want to make, it just settles me to the point that by the time I'm up on the stage, I can deliver it comfortably and calmly. And I've already got my posture set up. So it's a combination of, it's not the end of the world if I flub it or fail, but also trying to settle myself within that.
Well, thanks, Scottie. I really appreciate the plug for the book. But more importantly, I wanted to thank you for recognizing me as the person that designed that stealth breathing. No, I'm kidding. I did not design that. Every first responder, military, police, fire, and people who are put in situations that are completely out of their control and something happens, their senses get exploded in their head, in a sense, metaphorically speaking. They teach these people one of typically 3 techniques, and you can look these up online for any of you listening now that have an experience like Scottie just described, and that doesn't have to be as serious as something causing you to go to that level, but we all respond to nervousness and anxiety differently. So it's called combat breathing, tactical breathing, or box breathing. Whichever one you choose, it doesn't really matter. They all work because they all get you breathing as it. You've seen people take a brown bag when they get nervous and go, it's not that. It's more really getting your brain to just relax those amygdalas in the back there that are protecting you and trying to figure out what's going on, which happens when we walk out on stage sometimes. In fact, many of us experience that, but to different levels. So thanks for that, Scottie. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So something I think is important to add to here is talking about kind of lowering the pressure and the stakes when you're going out to speak. One of the confidence problems that a lot of speakers have, I think it's a very natural problem, is that self-doubt and the imposter syndrome. Do I deserve to be here? Am I worth it? And then there's that natural inclination to attach the worthiness to the success of the speech, which then increases the stakes again. And instead, if you can think about the fact that you're already going to be presenting at this opportunity, whatever it is, it might just be a work meeting, it might be a pitch, it might be the World Championship of Public Speaking. But the fact that you already have this opportunity means that you are worth it. So in that sense, if you can think you've got nothing to prove, but you do have credibility and expertise in whatever it is that you're going to present, and so just go out there and make the most of that opportunity to just present whatever it is that you're sharing with people, and you're likely to be a much better version of yourself than feeling that everything rides on whether or not you succeed in the presentation.
Stuart, I'm going to call you out on that one because I just don't get it. I mean, there's certainly different levels of high stakes. Yes.
Yeah.
But let's go to the moment you woke up on the day you knew you were doing your last final pitch where you won third place. Are you trying to tell us that that day didn't feel like a high stakes day to you?
No, I'm not trying to do that. And you made an
Okay.
assumption there, Nathan. You
What
assumed I
was that?
woke up. I did not sleep much of the night before. So as I said at the outset, I'm not pretending any of this is easy. In
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
ways, it's a mental struggle that you're fighting with yourself. Um, but I mean, to talk specifically about the Toastmasters World Champion, as I said, there are 30,000 people that enter
Mm.
each year, and many, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of those that enter say to themselves, I am going to be the world champion this year. And guess what? Only one of them is, only one of them can be. And so from my experience, and I've met many of those people, from my
Yeah.
experience, it's not helpful. And then there's devastating um, feelings of failure and bitterness when they don't win. And I think that that's just doing it for the wrong reason. So, for example, if you are in the World Championship of Public Speaking, what you have is an amazing opportunity to speak on a huge stage in front of a global audience of thousands of people. And that's already the win. Whether or not you win the world championship is merely incidental. And so there are ways I think you can transform any situation. It might take a bit of work, but any situation into something positive. Suppose it's an investor pitch and you don't get the investment. Okay, that's disappointing, but you've still probably learned something along the way. Maybe you've made contacts that you didn't have before. Maybe you've figured something out that you didn't know before. You've had an opportunity that you didn't have before. And I guess that's another point right here is we often think of things as obligations, especially if you get told to speak rather than choosing to speak. But even where you've chosen to speak, it can start to feel like an obligation. I've got to do my best. I've got to win this contest. I've got to get the investors' money. And again, it's unhelpful because you feel like you're being forced in that direction, even if it's you doing the forcing. So if you can
Mm.
think of it more as an opportunity, I choose to be here. I am making this choice. I am going to benefit from this. It it helps. I think. I'm not, as I say, not saying it's easy, but I think those are the battles that you have to fight.
So, Stuart, what would be your number one suggestion to our audience for appearing in a situation where you want to lower that anxiety? Not a technique. I'm not talking about a technique, but how would you help them frame their minds to lower that expectation and reduce that anxiety, maybe reduce that self-doubt in a situation specifically where, let's say, you're walking out on the TED stage for 3
Yeah.
minutes, and you look down in the front row and you know the people that are sitting there because you've seen them for your whole life. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Al Gore, yada, yada, yada. How would you tell somebody like that during your preparation time with them, because you should have weeks to prepare for something like that, to help that? What's your techniques? What are your recommendations? I'd love to hear them.
Well, yeah, I think this comes back to my really number one tip for confidence in speaking. And I think confidence is so critical in speaking, not just for the speech itself, but from that moment that you know you're presenting in the future through all of the time. You've got to be confident. And the number one tip for being confident is to understand that speaking or the act of presenting is not about you, the speaker, it's about your audience. And most of the problems that speakers find they face with nervousness are all
Mm.
self-centered. Very understandable problems, we all have them, but what if I fail? What if I mess up? What if I forget my lines? What if I don't achieve the goal that I'm trying to achieve. All of these negative things focused on yourself. But that's not what an audience has come to see. And I say
Right.
audience, even if it is a group of investors who are listening to a pitch, if it's the TEDx audience, if it's the Toastmasters audience, they have come to see you speak about something, to share an idea, to share a message. And so, as the speaker, what you have is that gift that you can be giving them. And so, my advice is stop thinking about yourself, think about how the audience is going to benefit from having heard you. And again, one thing to think about here is it doesn't need to be every single person in the audience. There will always be people that maybe aren't as interested in your ideas, but all you need to do is resonate with one person in that audience, change one person's thinking, and maybe you're changing their life, and that alone makes what you are doing worth it. And when you start to think like that, you forget about yourself. And that's the beauty. You become more confident because you're thinking about the audience and not yourself.
Yeah, again, Stuart, I'm agreeing with you. And I would almost go one step further in that you need to know your audience for so many reasons and so many different kinds of presentations, whether you're networking, whether you are selling, and for high stakes presentations. You need, and that's part of your preparation, right? Is preparing your presentation for this specific audience. And getting to the confidence factor, and I will admit I have a little bit of the imposter syndrome also. It's like, I can't believe I'm actually talking to some of these people. That they're there for a reason, and you're the expert, and they want to hear what you have to say. So you have to have that confidence there with your grounding of like, I'm here for a reason. They wouldn't have asked me to speak otherwise, or I made it into this round of this competition. I've made it into this round to interview to become the managing director of Latin America, or whatever the event is. And if you can remember that and don't assume your audience knows as much as you think they do, that you actually have to sort of spell out things to make it easy for them to understand, that just works. I mean, that's the secret sauce, is that you know your stuff, you're able to present it, and your audience will hear it. And I agree with you, Stuart, that you don't have to get everybody in the audience super excited about everything, but for the most part, you will, because you're good at what you do, and you've prepared well. And I think for me, preparation is the biggest thing to raise my confidence. I already know I've covered these things. And I also will add one more thing, and that is, be prepared for the question that you don't want to be asked, whether it's publicly or not, because at least you have a framework for where to go with it. That also helps me.
Yeah, and when you are focusing yourself on the audience, and Stuart, that is probably one of the more profound things that I have heard from you before, and I have heard this a couple times from you during our previous sessions. It makes so much sense, because it reminds me also of a good friend of mine who coaches TED and TEDx presenters. That's what he does every day, all day long. And he always says, make the audience the hero in your talk, not you. And that goes straight up to just about every talk. Like you're saying, if you focus on the audience and give them that, I like to call it solid nourishment, and no empty calories, no fluff, no, just make it concise and give them those bits and bytes that help them make their lives better and the people around them better, if that's the goal, then I'm all for that. Thank you for that.
Well, I want to just follow up with something that Scottie said and talk about preparation, because something I know that we as coaches have talked about before is that usually you're not looking for perfection. I mean, perfection is impossible to achieve, and if you actually achieve it, it's often not helpful because it doesn't seem as real. But one thing I think is really important with practice is, for most presentations, when you're practicing, you shouldn't be practicing to get it perfect, but you should be practicing to become fluent. And with that, I mean the ideas that you've got in your head, just running the words it can even be mentally. You don't have to say them out loud. Sometimes I'm thinking in the shower, just mentally, how would I say something? And the more you do that, the more you manage to naturally think about how these words should best come out of your mouth, so that when you then come to the presentation, you have the best of both worlds. You're fluent enough that you know what you're talking about. And yet at the same time, it's not a pre-rehearsed word perfect speech. It's still coming out naturally in your own words. And I think that that is really important. And it's also a relief to know I don't need to be perfect. It's okay to make a mistake. But I'd be interested, Nathan and Scotty, what you think about the purpose of practice. Because as I say, for me, it's very much the fluency of my ideas in my own words.
Well, you were just addressing Scotty and Nathan, and I just wanted to quickly jump in here, Stuart, because I wanted to ask you about practice and make it really, really practical, right? What are the kind of steps that you took to prepare? And you entered, perhaps for our audience, it's important to understand that you didn't just enter one contest. This wasn't just one thing. This was a year-long progression that went from one contest to the next, qualifying for the next level. There are many, many levels in between, and each one you had to prepare, right? And of course, then the very big one, the final, that must have been amazing to prepare, amazingly difficult to prepare, because in the semi-final you gave a speech, and then you had to give a different speech, I think, the next day, right? So how specifically did you prepare for these opportunities, Stuart?
Yeah, so I can share with you what I did. The situation for these Toastmaster speeches, though, I do want to be clear, is quite unusual. So I just talked about not being word perfect. You could make a case for saying in the Toastmaster speeches, you do need to be word perfect or close to word perfect for one reason. And that's that these speeches are timed. They're between 5 and 7 minutes. And if you go 30 seconds over time, you get disqualified. So you do need to know how long your speech is when you deliver it. And that means each speaker probably has a maximum number of words that they can say in the time. And then there is that sense of, well, you want to get the most out of the words that you're saying. And this is the thing I love about these contests, is that you get to craft a speech again and again. So that speech in the semi-final is something that has been worked on over many, many months and improved and improved. And again, it's a great lesson. The fact is, nothing ever ends up being perfect, because you can always improve it. You're right, after the semi-final, you have to give a different speech in the final that is 2 days later. And you don't have time to start writing a speech then. It's something you need to prepare months in advance as well. What was rather unusual about my situation was, after I knew that I was going to the semi-finals, I had about 3 months to prepare and also get my potential finals speech ready. Halfway through that time, I found out that I was getting divorced, and that changed everything in my life. I stopped preparing, stopped speaking, couldn't think about anything else whatsoever. So somewhat amusingly now, we got to 1 week before the convention, and that's when I picked up my speeches again and started to go through things. So everything was very, very last minute for me. Actually, what happened the Sunday before I flew down to Florida was I spent some time with a Toastmaster friend called Ed Skirker, who lives in Rhode Island. And we just did some exercises. He pushed me out of my comfort zone. Some of the things we were doing were quite silly, but things moderating the tone of my voice, the expression in my voice. And what I learned that day was to have fun again. And I am a big believer of speaking should be fun. And if speaking doesn't feel like fun, try and find a way to make it fun. Have fun when you're speaking, be playful with your audience, because it just makes it so much easier. So 4 days after that, I won my semi-final, and 2 days after that, I came third in the finals. So it's a mixture. In one sense, I was quite well prepared, but in another sense, it was also quite fresh as well because of the break that I was forced to take. Claudio, I don't know, does that answer your question? Or...
Yeah, Stuart, when life happens, it actually is it can be a good thing because it shifts your brain away from the anxiety of something else. So thank you for sharing that. That's very, very interesting. And I also would add that as part of preparation, you need to handwrite things. There's a brain learning connection for actually handwriting on your notes. I know a lot of people don't like to do that, but if you can start to learn to do that as you prepare, and then also when you write within your notes, you can use different colors, block, font, different things to really prepare the big words or the bullet points that you want to use. Those are some just minor tactical things that I use to help prepare for things. And I think I also think you should do some reading or call on your friends. Like Stuart, you said you called an associate who helped you do some preparation, out of your comfort zone. If you can practice with somebody who doesn't really know what you're talking about, that's a brilliant way to see how well your presentation is going to land. And also it will give you some grounding in terms of what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And then the other thing I would recommend, and Claudia, I'm going to give you a plug, is to actually, look at, if you're a founder, do some research, find some materials that will give you some grounding. They're going to help you find a hook. They're going to help you plant your stake somewhere in your presentation and in your confidence meter that will really help you and serve you going forward. And then I would suggest you take some handwritten notes after your event sometime that day to reflect on what went really well and what you'd like to improve on, getting back to that learning opportunity. And then that will help you go forward more confidently in the future.
Okay, thank you, Scottie. And speaking of writing, I want to just add one more thing because we're almost out of time here. I think this conversation could probably go on for many hours. In preparing for a high stakes presentation that I'm coaching people for, I'm still going to stick with that. I can't get that word out of my mind. Yes, I'll help them reframe their mind in terms of what they're thinking about. Thank you for that one. But I do want to offer a couple suggestions here to our audience, which is I always ask people to do one of two things when they're thinking through their content of what they want to cover. Either mind map it out. And if you don't know what mind mapping is, just look it up. You'll find out what it is. It's just a free way of thinking and getting all your ideas out. And then you can figure out the order later on. The other is just open up a PowerPoint or a Google Slides and just start creating your storyboard. And not the slides, just the storyboard, so you can think through it visually. After you do that, and after you get your content done and what you want to say, whether you're going to memorize it, which I think we need to have a separate conversation of one of these meetings of memorize versus no memorize. I don't think we have enough time to cover that today, but I would do three things. One, once you have your whole content ready, break it down. Don't start at the beginning all the time and then try to get through the end every time you're practicing. Break it down into some pieces and learn each piece rather than trying to learn the whole thing together. Second is record yourself speaking the words that you want to use when you're presenting, and then listen to it. And after you listen to it, you'll find out whether or not it's really giving you the kind of information that you need. And then your brain will start to really access those words in a much different way than if you just try to repeat it. And the third is do what Scottie just says, write out what you want to say. And if you can write out what you want to say with or without the slides, your brain will follow.
I just wanted to build on what Nathan said. I totally agree with you, Nathan, but especially the breaking it down. I'm not a big fan of memorizing a speech, but again, the Toastmasters world is slightly different where it needs to be close to word perfect. But one thing that I found when I had a speech where I more or less knew exactly everything I was going to say, I'd start practicing at the beginning, I'd make a mistake, go back to the beginning, make a mistake, go back to the beginning. Guess what? I never got past the beginning. And the beauty of breaking it down is you can start anywhere. And one of my favorite things to do is to practice the ending, because of course the ending of a speech needs to be powerful, and then practice the bit before the ending going into the ending, and then the bit before that going into the ending, and that way almost working backwards through the speech, so you can build that familiarity of all parts of the speech rather than just starting at the beginning and failing and keep getting stuck there. So Nathan, I think that's excellent advice.
Yeah, sorry. Excuse me, I've got a little bit of something caught in my throat. The other thing to do, and this is one of the hardest things that I've learned, and I learned it actually when I was studying to be able to teach English to adults as a second language, and is to be able to observe carefully how others speak and present. And then more importantly, you have to observe carefully how you speak and present. So if you can learn to observe yourself as an observer and not the self-critic. And the self-critic is the thing that just skewers us every time. Oh, I don't like the sound of my voice. I didn't like the way my hair looked. I didn't like, this, that, and the other. You have to get away from that and realize that your audience is never going to be that critical. And just try to observe what you sound like when you're delivering things and see if it really sounds interesting to you, pretending that you don't know yourself. And that's a great learning technique. And I find it works very, very well for my clients and for me. So just wanted to add that. Learn to become an observer, not a self-critic.
And when you are preparing for any sort of presentation, whether it's high stakes, low stakes, or whatever, you will feel some level of nervousness. We all do. Some of us have that childlike nervous anticipation. I can't wait to get up there, sort of like me. And you have the debilitating kind, which is that self-doubt and everything that goes with that. So my suggestions to everybody are 3 things. When it gets to the point where you walk out there in front of people, you're going to feel some level of nervousness. We all do. So how do you deal with it? 1, we've already talked about it. Breathing is the number 1 thing you need to do. If you're not breathing properly, then everything else will probably not work too. So taking control of your breath for just a couple of seconds before, or as you're walking out to that point where you're about to start speaking, is key. And the second part of breathing is your posture. If you have the right posture, your body will react differently, and so will your brain to what's about to happen there. So those 2 things are key. And then the third one, which is almost magical, and I wish I could take credit for making this up, but I didn't. It's called in psychology a mood inducer. I had a PhD MD I was coaching one day, and he said, oh, well, that's what we call a mood inducer, when he asked me, how do you deal with nervousness? So what's a mood inducer? It's just a piece of music that when you listen to it, it either calms you down, slows your heart rate down, or it gets you even more excited and forms goosebumps on your arms and on the back of your neck. I personally like the goosebumps, so I go for the Rocky theme whenever I'm walking out on stage. Sorry, I've just dated myself, but that movie had such an impression, and the music still, I'm hearing it now in my mind virtually. I don't even need headphones on, and I'm already feeling my body feeling differently than it was before I mentioned it. So breathing, posture, and find a piece of music that gets you into that state of mind, almost like that. And you can do this even backstage if you're on a stage. So there you go.
I just wanted to touch on one thing that we haven't really mentioned yet, but about being human and making mistakes. Now, there are different types of high stakes presentation, and if you're giving a Toastmasters contest speech or a TED talk, you're in the kind of show must go on territory. If something goes wrong, you can't really start again. You need to go on. But there are other situations where you're more interactive with your audience, and it can be okay to acknowledge a mistake or reality. And I think of one very high stakes situation for me. It was my interview to study law at Oxford University, and I was sitting opposite the law professor who would become my professor. and he was asking me legal problems, and I had never studied law. I wasn't supposed to have done for the interview, but everything he said to me, my answers just got worse and worse, and he was running rings around me until about 2 or 3 minutes in, I said to him, "I'm sorry, this has just all come out all wrong. Can I please start again?" And he said yes. And to this day, I wonder if that was what allowed me to get into Oxford, because I acknowledged the reality of what was happening. And instead of just ploughing on with the nonsense coming out of my mouth, I adjusted. I realized there was a mistake. I adjusted, and made that connection with him. And so I think there might be situations where that can really work as well. And showing your human side is going to make all the difference.
Wow, Stuart, you just blew my mind because you started with a real gem today, and we are almost out of time, so I would consider you just closed with a real gem. And that is that human factor. And I think that human factor will become more and more important. You know, ChatGPT, AI, machine learning is all in the news, and the real differentiator is that human factor. And it's scary to see how this AI, that, you know, it has some really impressive results, right? Where you go like, this is truly human-like, but there is one thing missing, and that is that heart-to-heart connection. And that is something that I believe we'll have a long time where we have that advantage, where we can make things human. And it starts with making mistakes and embracing those mistakes and looking at them instead of as, oh my God, I just failed, and withdraw into yourself like you just shared with us, Stuart. You know, you basically, you know, you looked at the feedback that you got, your sensory input, and you were like, okay, it's like, let's reset, right? And so making mistakes and then leveraging those is certainly a skill that will not only get you onto the stage of World Championship of Public Speaking, but very far in life in any situation. So with that, I want to very quickly remind everybody that PitchZone is also a pitch review platform. So if you do have a pitch, a short pitch, that you want us to take a look, whether you are connecting with your audience, whether you're actually speaking from heart to heart, apply, and we will provide all the feedback that you need to take your pitch to the next level. And while I'm pushing buttons here, let me also push the one for the subscribe, just in case you haven't subscribed to this channel. Subscribe to the channel. And with that, thank you all of the coaches. Thank you, Nathan, Scottie, Stuart. It was a real pleasure having you here, and we shall see each other again next week. In the meantime, have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. See you. Bye-bye.